Milid Duchusa joke. My uncle tells me that there was once this Litvish guy who was davening with a Sephardim. And you know the Sephardim love to say Kaddish, everything is Kaddish. So the Litvish guy loses his patience. He comes to the guy. He says, don't you people know there's a halacha that says, Ein marbi mekadishim, that you're not supposed to stam increase kadeshim? So he says, really, is that a halacha? He says, yes. But you know, I
after they don't say Kaddish, and the Rabbi and the Luther told me that, if there's nobody saying Kaddish in Shiur, you don't have to say Kaddish except after Aleinu. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
It's
hard not to say. The Moroccans say Chatzi Kaddish after the Aleinu. But there's Mikra Din is supposed to be Sheva Kadeshim, 7 Kaddishes in Yom. That's the basic obligation. 3 by Shachris. 4 by Shachris, 2 by Mincha, and 1 by Mariv.
This is mamish
2 by Mariv.
Because we're learning about minhag.
Yeah, we're learning about minhag. So let's just do a quick review over last week about minhag. So Shema b'niv musar v'ich v'atitish tarisi mecha appears twice in Mishlei Aleph Ches, Vav Chaf. Those are the 2 sources for minhag. Gemara Mesachim, Daf Nun Amud Beis, number 3 in the reference sheet. The Gemara, the most explicit Talmudic reference to having to observe minhag, it talks about the Bnei Baishan that wouldn't take a ferry on Friday. They wanted to annul this minhag, and Rabbi Yochanan says, no, you need to keep it because it says, Al titish taris yimecha. Another example, number 4 in the reference sheet, Halal and Rosh Chodesh is an example of minhag. Beisa Daf Daled Amud Beis. Yom Tov Sheni Shal Galios is a minhag. Yerushalmi talks about a minhag where they would not cut down the cedar trees from a certain location. Migdal Tzviyah, because they had a tradition that those were the trees that Yaakov Avinu planted for the Mishkan. Number 8, Beis Yosef brings the Rivash in the name of the Ramban, Mishpat HaCherem, that there's such a thing called Kabbalas Harabim that could be chal, that could be effective for the descendants. Okay? The Mishpat HaCherem learns it out from Matan Torah, just as when it came to Matan Torah, the Jewish people accepted to observe the Torah, and it had bearing for their children and for their great-grandchildren and for all the generations to come. So too you can have a chayrim or a minhag that's effective for all the coming generations. The Shud Rivash in Siman Shin Tzadites again brings the source from this Gemara Mesachim and Makom Shanago about the Bnei Baishan that wouldn't take a ferry on Friday. Number 11 in the reference sheet, we talk about a minhag of the Bnei Chuzai, they were taking challah from oris, taking challah from rice. So Ashi said that it depends. Sometimes this is a good minhag, sometimes this is not a good minhag. If all they eat is rice, that's their staple, so it's a good minhag, because otherwise they're going to forget about challah. Just as we talked about the other week, that in certain locales, people forget that there's such a thing as an isser to carry in the Rishus Harabim. They go on vacation, they go to places, they don't even know that there's an isser to carry for Amos and Rishus Harabim. So therefore, you might have the same with challah. The community might forget about the obligation to take challah, so it's a good minhag if everybody eats rice. But if not everybody eats rice, it's a bad minhag, because you're going to have a loaf of wheat dough, you're going to have a loaf of rice dough, and you're going to take double the amount of challah from the rice to discharge the obligation on the dough of the wheat, and you can't do that. You can't take challah from a dough that is not subject to the obligation of challah to discharge the obligation for a dough that does have the obligation.
That a woman cannot be motzi. A little boy or somebody who
Gemara and Brachos.
Your chiyuv has to be at the same level.
Your chiyuv has to be on the same level. Gemara and Brachos Daf Chaf Amud Beis. It says that a woman can't discharge a man's obligation because there's a suffix whether or not she's mechuyev midaraisa d'Rabbanan. Although there are many Rishonim, the Rajb and the Raiva, that hold that women are mechuyev midaraisa. Depends on the gears of the Gemara. It's a sfek sveika. By the way, you mentioned about women discharging men. There's a machlokes Rishonim. According to some Rishonim, Rashi and the Rambam, there's a suffix whether or not women have a chiyuv midaraisa to bench, or there's only a chiyuv midrabanan. There are many other Rishonim, like the Rajb and the Raiva, that held that no, a woman have a chiyuv daraisa to say birchas hamazon. So what happens if a woman is not sure whether or not she benched or not? A man has to bench again because it's a Safik Daraisa. He's not sure whether he discharged a Daraisa obligation. What about a woman? If a woman's not sure whether or not she benched, does she need to bench again? It's a Sfek Sveika. But it's a Sfek Sveika that she is Mukhayv because it could be she didn't bench. Right?
She's my
Deraisa. So it's a very complicated shayla. The Mishnah Berurah brings a big machlokes. Rabbi Akiva Eiger against the base of Ephraim. Big machlokes, Paiskim, what to do if a woman's not sure as to whether or not she benched. And it's very hard to be Paishat B'Safek. Let her wash again and eat again. Right? Some Paiskim say she doesn't need to bench, some Paiskim say she should bench. So you know what the halach is? She can choose. We let her choose. What does she feel like doing? If she says, I don't want to bench, she doesn't need to bench. That's what the Mishnah Berurah says to do. She let her do what she wants.
They go on even more dangerous ground. They go on even more dangerous ground as whether or not she can be motzi and be a zimun.
Well, if she's by herself, she can make a zimun.
Right?
Three women can make a zimun. Also,
2 men and a woman.
Yeah, Taisus already asked.
No, not if she can be motzias, but could she be included in?
Could she be included in a zimun? So the Gemara is mashma not. The Gemara says they make their own zimun, but they don't make a zimun together with men. Okay.
Somebody who I think one of the Rishonim or somebody Kufat Rishonim, from
Yeah.
what I had seen, said that he does. I forget who they're doing.
Yeah, it's a machlokes Rishonim and Taisus. Some Rishonim hold a woman have an obligation to make a zimun. Some say it's only a rishus. It's only a voluntary it's a voluntary mitzvah for them to make a zimun. My mother, when she was in seminary in Cleveland, in Yavne Seminary, the girls, they did make a zimun. They made a zimun. Yeah, they did. They made a zimun. The question is if she could complete a zimun. So the minig is not. What? Minig you need 10 men. Okay? So number 12 in the reference sheet, the Shut Harash Klal Nun Hey, we already saw this last week. He says, Afilu minig she'asu l'siyagul archaka, v'yachalav l'dei kilkol yesh levatla haminog, any minog that could lead to a mishap or could lead to a kula leniency in halacha that is not acceptable, you have to be mevataled. And the chiddush of the Rosh is even if it was nohug al pia gedolim, afilu hinigu gedolim asaminog, even if the gedolim made the minog, you have to be mevataled. It's the same attitude as the Rambam in Reish Sadi Gimel about getting up for the Seres HaDibros. He says, even though in Baghdad, the Chacham in Baghdad made people get up for the Seres HaDibros, you have to be mevataled because you're not allowed to give special treatment to the Seres HaDibros. It reinforces the Christian belief that the only obligatory section of the Torah is the Seres HaDibros, the Shita of the Rambam. Okay, modern day poskim still debate it. According to Rav Yashiv and according to Rabbi Yosef, you should not be getting up for the Seres HaDibros. Rabbi Yashiv had a Talmud, Rabbi Ben Sion Cook, from the Cook family. So he said that Rabbi Yosef sent Rabbi Cook to Rabbi Yashiv to get his opinion about standing up for the Seres HaDibros, and Rabbi Yashiv said he believes it's asr, in line with his Rambam. And Rabbi Yosef was very happy to hear that Rabbi Yashiv agreed with him. I just heard from a dayan in Harnof. He told me that he asked a shayla to Rabbi Yashiv. Rabbi Yashiv sent him to Rabbi Vadia. They had respect. There was tension between them when they were on the Rabbanut, but they did have a mutual respect for each other. Rav Moshe Feinstein is matter standing for the Seres HaDibros. The Tzitz Eliezer is matter standing for the Seres HaDibros. Okay, so number 14 in the reference sheet. So we talk about yerek, vegetables that grew in Beit Shan. So Rabbi said that you should eat the vegetables in Beit Shan, even though they did not have tithes taken from it. Rabbi wanted to make it clear, based on the testimony of Rabbi Yeshua ben Zariz, who testified as to how Rabbi Meir conducted himself. He said he wanted to be meval to the minhag because there's no basis for such a minhag. Okay, they used to take maasros on the vegetables in Beit Shan. Number 15 in the reference to the Yam Shlomo the Marshal. Right, a person is not allowed to be more machmer than his Rebbe unless you have a proof against your Rebbe. So there's a parallel over here. Just as you're allowed to be more machmer than your Rebbe, it's very hot in here. They're really toasting us.
He's getting home.
Getting toasty.
I'm ready to take the ownership.
Okay.
Do it.
So it's the same thing with the Marshal. The Marshal holds that if you have a proof that your Rebbe is wrong, you're allowed to be more machmir than your Rebbe. So it's the same thing with the minhag. It's the same attitude that the Rosh had vis-a-vis minhagim. If you have an absolute proof that the minhag is wrong, you don't have to observe the minhag. We saw the Marshal last week, number 16 in the reference sheet, his Agdama to Bava Kama. We said that he didn't like this idea that the Sfardim follow the Sfardi Poskim, that the Ashkenazim are following the Ashkenazi Poskim. He said halacha is not something that's subject to ethnicity, or it's subject to Jewish ethnicity, but it's not subject to Sfardic or Ashkenazic ethnicity. He says you have to pass him. Minhagim are, yeah. So if a certain community took on a minhag, for example, not to eat kitnias, so therefore the Ashkenazic families took on this trinity, the Sfardim didn't.
We have Masoros that are different from our Masoros.
Right, but he says, but if it's a machlokes in minhag, that's what Rabbi Zafran and Harnov said. If it's a machlokes about minhag, well, it's not really a machlokes. Some communities have the minhag tit kidneys and some don't have the. So then you can distinguish between Ashkenazim and Sfardim. But if it's nothing to do with minhag, it's a machlokes whether or not this fruit gets a ha'eh, if popcorn is shahakol, if popcorn is hadama. Okay? So it has nothing to do with Ashkenazi or Sephardi. Somebody says, okay, Rav Mordechai Eliyahu and the Ben Ish Chai held the popcorn is shahakol, right? Most Ashkenazi Paisim held the popcorn is hadama. So that means that Sephardi make a shahakol on popcorn and Sephardi a nechte getag. It's nothing to do with Ashkenazi or Sephardi.
Popcorn or any corn?
What? Popcorn. You know, the truth is popcorn is a little bit tali in the Machaikis, Mechaber and Ramah. So it's not such a good example, actually. Okay, if anything, okay, I'm going to get too much off on a tangent over here, but I'm just saying that there are many machlokes that have nothing to do with minhag of Sfardim or minhag of Ashkenazim. So just because the Sfardic place can take on a certain stance and Ashkenazim place can take on another, that doesn't have any bearing on whether you're Ashkenazi or Sfardi. You have to learn this again. You go according to the proof. The Raya, we go back to the Shut Klalman Hey Simin Yud. It's the same Shut Harosh that we saw in reference number 12, number 17. What's his raya that halacha overrides minhag? Because he says even the Sanhedrin Hagdolah that sat in the Lishkas Hagazas, the highest court in Eretz Yisrael, they didn't have the power to annul any halacha. So therefore there's no community that could establish a minhag that's contrary to halacha. That's what the Rosh in Simin Klal Nun Hey Simin Yud says. Okay? Now, I'm going to give an example. Anybody's curious to know what's an example of a minhag tos? What's a minhag that's contrary to halacha? So there's a beautiful example, number 18 in the reference sheet, Ramon Yardeh Simin Kutzad Yesif Yudalid. He brings a halacha from the Rav Yah. You know, there's certain harchakas that a husband and wife need to keep when she is not pure to him. Okay, they're not allowed to have relations, so you're not allowed okay, Rashi was machmer not even to hand things, which is a big chumrah which was taken on, because if you hand something to her, you might touch her. But certainly one shouldn't touch his wife when she's not pure to him. And there are many other hachakas. And one of the hachakas is they're not supposed to eat from the same plate. So the Ravil wanted to say that the night that she's going to mikvah, they're having dinner together, and that night she's going to be going to mikvah, they're allowed to eat from the same plate. And he says the reason is because you want her to be willing to go to mikvah. If she doesn't feel emotionally close to her husband, she might not want to go to mikvah. So that was what the Rabbi said, and that was the minhag. If you look at the Ramah, right, the Ramah makes it sound even more lenient, that they were makel during all the Shiva Nikim to eat from the same plate. The Ramah says the minhag was that they were all makel when it comes to this, so she should be willing to go to the mikveh for him. But you still have to be machmer. The Rav Yah, that is the source of this minhag, Hagas Mordechai, number 19, quotes this minhag from the Ramah, says, he says, what's the whole issue about eating in the same plate? They might get so emotionally comfortable with each other, it might lead them to live with each other when she has yet to have gone to the mikvah. He says, he can hold on, wait a few hours, you can hold your horses. She's anyways going to the mikvah that night, so you don't have to be worried that because they're eating from the same plate, they might come to live with each other. So he says, there's no chashash of hergel avera. So toiv lachalima kadesh litbal im yachal litbal. That's what the Rav Yah says. Yet the Ramah says you shouldn't be makel, and that's what the Paiskim say. That even during the last meal before going to mikvah, our Paiskim, and that was actually the minhag that they would eat at the same plate, even though she had not yet gone to mikvah. But Paiskim say not to be makel, because one kula leads to another kula, especially when it comes to these matters.
yes, they'll eat together or not eat.
Oh, so the fact that they were eating together at the end of the Shiva Nikim, many poskim held that that's a toast. If you look at the Bach, number 20 in the reference sheet, the Bach goes so far to say, Yesh lidrosh barabim de isura ka'avad. He says, even though that's the minhag to be mekel, but they're doing an isur, the oichlin yachad mikar achas b'mei libuna. Okay? So here you have an example where the poskim held that something is a minhag toast. Okay, even though there's a positive aspect to the minhag, so that you should be willing to go to the mikvah. The reason is because you start giving them one heter, they're going to start. They're going to exactly. You're going to have an extension. Okay, so number 21 in the reference sheet. This is the Gemara Pesachim, number Daf Nun Aleph Amud Beis. Dvarim hamutar macherem nogu b'em iser iyat rasha latirem b'fneim amara kutai. You see, you had the Kuthites, the Samaritans. They used to live up there in Hagrizim. There is still a group of Samaritans up there. They bring their karbonos, the carbon Pesach, and Hagrizim. So the Kuthites, remember we talked about the Kuthites a few times. We talked about them when we gave our Shiur and Geirim, and then we talked about it in one of the other Shiurim. For many, many centuries, they were regarded as full-fledged Jews. The Mishnah in the 7th paragraph of Bracha says you can make a zimun with the Kuthites. Okay, so you see that the Mishnah held that they're Jewish. Because there was a bit of a debate. Did they convert because they were afraid of the lions? They wanted refuge from the lions, or did they really sincerely convert? And the Stam Mishnah held that they're Jewish, and all of a sudden the Gemara in Chulin Daf Yud says that they found an Avodah Zarah, a little idol on Har Gerizim. They were bowing to this little statue of a dove, and then they said that they're no longer Jewish. Okay, so all the Mefarshim asks, what's going on over here? Somebody's regarded as Jewish for centuries, and then all of a sudden you determine that he's a guy. So you have the Rabbeinu Tam that's quoted from the Mordechai, that if you have tar to the Geriusa, number one, they became Jewish with a motivation. They had ulterior motives to become Jewish. Okay, so as long as they behave like a Jew, we'll regard them as Jewish. But if somebody only became Jewish with ulterior motives, and now you see he's behaving like a guy, he's behaving like a non-Jew, so then it's a Gilu Milsalam afraid that he was never Jewish, and that's the case of the Kuthites.
But that's generations down the road.
I know, it's generations down the road. But it turned out that they were actually worshipping this little idol for many generations. They were keeping it under wraps. For many, many centuries, they were worshipping this. So the Chasam Sofer has a tremendous chiddush. It's the Goz Chasam Sofer in Orach Chaim.
What ends up happening, you have generations of children who are goyim.
Goyim, exactly. But the thing is, they didn't intermarry. There was no intermarriage between the Kuthites and the mainstream communities. If there was, it would have big problems. You see, one of the issues was, when you had one of the things I said I won't talk about is the falasha, because some people could find it extremely offensive. They're Ethiopian Jews that consider themselves full-fledged Jews. So one controversy that I refrain from talking about is the controversy about whether or not they were Jewish, because a lot of Ethiopians consider this very, very offensive. Right? What do you mean we're Jewish or not? We sacrificed to come to Eretz Yisrael. We've for generations been persecuted because we observed. Okay, but whatever it is, Rabbi Yosef, the Ethiopian community is very grateful to Rabbi Yosef, because during this controversy, Rabbi Yosef, he said that the Ethiopians are Jewish. He based himself on the Radvaz. 500 years ago, this question came in front of the Radvaz, and the Radvaz already said that the Ethiopians are considered Jewish. So someone wanted to say, if you consider them Jewish, well, they didn't have a Messiah of how to give a kosher get. So it's even more problematic. Then you have problems with Mamzer. So Rabbi Yosef dealt with it. I'm not sure exactly how he dealt with it, but he managed to get around that problem. Okay? So, getting back to this whole concept, this whole discussion of the Kuthites. So, the Kuthites, even when they were regarded as Jewish, they were generally very ignorant about halacha. Okay? So, when they took on certain stringencies, you could tell the Kuthites, listen here, fellows, but this stringency is nonsense. You don't have to keep it. It's based on nonsense. But we know what happens? He says, if this minhag is nonsense, then they're going to start thinking that other things are nonsense, and they're going to start getting rid of a whole bunch of halachas. That's the attitude of people. You say, this thing that for my grandmother, my great-grandmother said is Kodesh Kadashim, and now you're telling me it's nonsense, so she's going to say, okay, you know what, this halacha is probably under the same bracket too. It's probably also nonsense. So that's why you shouldn't tell a Kuthite, when he's mistakenly being stringent about something, you shouldn't tell him that it's mutter.
That logic only goes in one direction.
Exactly.
Somebody, one rabbi mentioned that there was a minhag among Moroccan women that on Motzei Tishba, I think, from the afternoon, they used to clean the houses. And one rabbi came along, He said, no, you don't have to bother. You're fasting and don't sell.
Yeah.
So they stopped. They started worrying that maybe they said not to do it because the Mashiach is not going to come. So he said, no, you continue
to clean.
We're afraid that if you're going to tell them you don't have to do this minute,
then they're going to get rid of other things.
They're waiting for Mashiach to come, and if you tell them to stop doing a certain minute, they'll start
doing things that are mistaken.
Stop believing that the Mashiach
is going to come. It's a similar idea. Yeah?
Stop the minhag of cleaning my house up, right?
No way. But you see, by the way, I do believe that this is absolutely true. You follow that. For example, a lot of the laws about milchiks and fleishiks, a lot of the chumras are completely unnecessary. Right? It's mind-boggling as to how many chumras have developed about basar v'chalav. So there's a lot of things that women grew up in their homes, thinking that it's like mamish kodesh kadashim, it's asr gomer to do something about basar v'chalav, and it's not really necessary. Well, if you tell her she doesn't need to do this, then she might think that everything. Okay, basar v'chalav, there's so many stringes with basar v'chalav, it's hard to actually be nichshel in basar v'chalav.
Sounds like Pesach.
Like Pesach, yeah.
It's a case in the paper today. This guy went up to a restaurant in Port Sharon. He saw it was down the wall, so he ordered a cheeseburger and he ate it. Wait. He said this was absolutely the best cheeseburger I've ever had in my entire life. So he went up to the guy and said, "What did you guys put in here?" He said, "Cheese and meat." No, that's what I said. What do you mean cheese? He said, "Yeah, real cheese." He said, "What it was kosher?" He says, "No, we decided to get rid of it 3 years ago, and they just forgot to take the tuna off the wheel."
Terrible.
The tuna is dated.
You always have to check the data.
I'm just telling you. That's what. So the guy is suing them. So they're saying it's not our fault. We told the manager of the mall to take all the whole mall went non-kosher. Told them to take off all the tuna. No, they're going to take it off.
Wow.
You saw this in the news.
It was in the paper today.
Well, you know what happened in Muncie? That there was a butcher selling non-kosher meat. Okay, so people felt very guilty about it. Right? What can you do?
They were more upset that they paid, what do you call it, kosher price?
The kosher price, that's part of the more. Okay, so Rashi there says, right? You tell them that this chumrah, that this essentially unnecessary chumrah, that this is essentially unnecessary chumrah, so they're going to take it even further, and then they're going to start being makel with things that they should really be machmer about. So the Gemara Mesachim Nun Aleph, let's read the Gemara. B'nei Medinas Hayom Nami Kevin L'Shich Rabbanan Gabai Kusadami. The people that lived overseas in the diaspora, they were also very ignorant of halacha, so they had the same status of the kutai of the Samaritans. So therefore, they are regarded as kutim, and therefore you're not allowed to be machmer. Now, here's a few examples of chumras, stringencies that they took on that they did not really need to take on. Yeah.
So this whole approach of not undermining chumras is because we're afraid that people will get a totally lax attitude about halacha. Yeah. That was in a time of ignorance. Right. Today,
there's very little ignorance. It's true.
Today we have, there are very few observant Jews who don't know the basic halachas of Shabbos and kashrus.
This is a very good question. How today do you determine what kind of community fits the bill of those kutaim, of those Samaritans, and those B'nai Hayom that you couldn't be makel for them because they might take the chumrah? Right.
So that's the issue that you brought up. You the side thing you said that gebrach is not that.
But you'd be surprised. I think that even today you have examples of chumras. I know that some chumras are very emotional. Rabbi Sternbuch, his wife used to tell Rabbi Sternbuch, "You and your Shulchan Aruch are traffic up my kitchen." Right? So that's basically the idea. So here's some examples of chumras that were unnecessary, but they didn't want to be mattered for them. One example says, you're allowed to have two men go into the bathhouse, two brothers. They're allowed to be in the bathhouse. There's nothing forbidden about that. But they said, no, two brothers are not allowed to bathe together. Okay? If you want to see what is Rashi says, Okay, we'll see that it's an issue here. We'll get to that very soon. So that was an unnecessary chumrah that they had. They said two brothers are not allowed to be in the bathhouse together. Umaysa, there was a story of Yehud of Hillel, ban of Shur Gamliel, two sons of Rabbi Gamliel, Yehud and Hillel. Sharachatu shneim be'echad b'kavul. They went to Kabul in Afghanistan, and they were brothers. They went into the bathhouse together. V'laz b'Medina, it became a big stink. Did you hear that the two sons of Rabbi Gamliel? Right? It was an outrage. The Pachke villain went up on the wall. Right? We've never seen such a business of two brothers bathing together. Hillel left the bathhouse and was not together and chose not to be together with his brother. And he didn't want to tell them that it's actually mutter. You know, there are certain people with whom you're not supposed to be in the bathhouse together. For example, your father, your father-in-law, the husband of your mother, that's your stepfather, the man that is married to your sister. Rabbi Yehuda is matter to be in the bathhouse with your father because you attend to your father, you take care of him. The same thing is with the husband of your mother, to whom there's also a chiyuv of kibud. You know, one of the chiyuvim of kibud is to your father-in-law and also to the spouse of your parent. There's a chiyuv to give cover to the spouse of your parent. They said, look, brother and brother-in-laws could be easily mixed up. If you're matir two brothers to be in the bathhouse together, what's going to eventually come? You're also going to be matir a brother to be together with a brother-in-law. Right? What's the issue? This sounds very bizarre, but that's what Rashi said. If your brother-in-law, exactly. Says, you know what the issue is? If you see your father or your father-in-law, you might look at him in the bathhouse and your imagination might run wild and start thinking inappropriate things. Why? Niskashim Mishamyat is going to start to think about the location from which he came out of. Okay? Libe lihirhur. As bizarre as that sounds. He starts to think, my wife came out of there. When he looks at his brother-in-law, he starts to think about his brother-in-law and his sister, so it leads to inappropriate thoughts. So that's why there was a halacha that you shouldn't be in the bathhouse together with the father or the father-in-law or the brother-in-law. So they made the chumrah and they said, okay, no two brothers are allowed to be together in the bathhouse. But it was wrong. But if you tell them the two brothers are allowed to be in the bathhouse, since they're not learned, they're ignoramuses, they're going to start being makel with a whole bunch of other things. Another example. Yoitzin bikur de kison b'Shabbos. Those are very loose sandals. And yoitzin bikur desin b'Shabbos bebiri. There was a location called Biri, and in Biri they wouldn't go out with these very wide sandals. Same story. Second paragraph, number 26 in the reference sheet. Again, these two brothers, Hillel and Yehuda, were making big stinks. They were troublemakers. They were doing things. Wherever they went, they used to do things that used to make people angry. What's his business going out with these white sandals? So they took them off. Okay? So why is the issue? Why do they not allow people to go out with these white sandals? Because they might fall off and you might come to carry it. Right? There's no erev in the location. You have these loose sandals. You might carry them. By the way, there is such a chashash when it comes to hats. I've gone to many poskim and they said they should not be wearing hats on Lakewood. On Lakewood, there's no erev. Rav Aaron Koller didn't want there to be an erev. He held like Rav Moshe Feinstein that it's better the big cities don't have an erev. So there's a halacha that if you wear a cap like what you have that fits very tightly on the head, that's not an issue. You're allowed to wear that on Shabbos. There's two issues with the wearing a hat. One is if it's a sun hat and the brim is one tefach wide, so it looks like an oil. It looks like you're carrying a roof. That's one issue. Another issue, Rashi says, because the hat might fly off and you might come to carry it on Shabbos. So in the places where there's no erev, you're not allowed to be going out with these black knetches, with these hats. You're not allowed to do it. How do I know? I was once in Brooklyn where there's no erev, or according to Moshe Feinstein, there was no erev, and a wind came, blew off my black hat. So I didn't want to carry it in the wind, so I carried the hand, and my uncle said, stop, there's no erev here, you can't carry the hat. So it's a real chashash. So what do they want to say? They wanted to say that the hats are tightly fit on the head. No, they're not. The fact that the black hat could fly off in the wind, right, that shows that it's not tight enough. A tight enough hat is a hat that would never blow off in the wind.
Well, almost any hat could blow off in the...
Not really. For example, one of the examples, if it has a string that goes under the chin. If you have a strap that goes under the chin.
There's no Indian of let's say a hat that's connected, that the thing that's connected.
So there's an issue of oil if it's made for the sun. I mean, the Mishnah Berurah says.
It's not an issue anymore. most brims
are less than a tefach.
And as far as the blowing off, we don't have the same issue of Ruach Shem Mitzuya, Ruach Shein Mitzuya.
Well, any hat that's liable to get blown off in the wind, according to the Shulchan Aruch.
There's wind and there's wind. We have that by Sukkah. That if the Sukkah can't withstand the Ruach Mitzuya, it's not a kosher.
Well, we answered hats, so obviously, not most hats don't fly
out.
I
was in Manhattan. I was in Manhattan on Shabbos Hanukkah, and there was 40 mile per hour wind gusts. Yeah. That would blow your head off. So you had to hold it.
You had to hold it. So for sure not allowed to do that. Okay, but the Mishnah said that the Gemara asks going out with hats in a location where there's no Eruv, unless it's a very unique hat which is much tighter than your typical hat, which I don't think a black brim hat fits that bill.
No.
I don't think that it's much tighter than your typical hat.
It's also much more aerodynamic.
It's aerodynamic? There you go.
For example,
yeah.
There's no Eruv in Lakewood. There's never been an Eruv.
I don't know. I think now they're starting to make limited Eruvs, like small neighborhoods that they are making.
No baby carriages and Shabbos?
So I think now in Lakewood, if you want to go from one neighborhood to another neighborhood, you have an issue. You have an issue taking your baby carriage from one.
But within one neighborhood,
So now what they do is in Lakewood they're making these inner community Eruvs, but they don't have a citywide Eruv because of Aaron Kotler wouldn't allow it.
So what happens when one Eruv hits the next one?
So that they don't. They have an issue. They have to.
Can you carry
from one Eruv to the next?
No, it's a problem. One of the challenges of living in Lakewood is that you can't take your baby carriage from one community to the other community.
But if the Arabs are Tasmudim,
you can, because it doesn't work. For example, if you Midoraisa, you can carry from one private domain to another private domain. I can go into my building, which is entirely a Rishus HaYachid because it's all surrounded by four walls. Midoraisa, I can carry from one Rishus HaYachid to the other Rishus HaYachid. The Chacham forbade carrying from one Rishus HaYachid to another Rishus HaYachid, both of which are under distinct ownerships. Okay, so the Chacham said, well, how do you solve the problem? But everybody co-owns some bread or matzah, whatever it is, so that unites everybody and they become like one big family. So therefore, even in Lakewood, if you have one private domain, this community has its own Eruv and this community has its own Eruv, unless you make an Eruv that combines the two, that amalgamates the two communities, you can't carry from one to the other.
So
he answered relying on Eruv Chatzeros in big cities. Okay? Because, the Gemara says you can't make an Eruv in Rishus HaRabim Midoraisa. Okay, so New York has a Rishus HaRabim. Rome at its height, I don't know how many people, had 1 million people. When the Chazal made a Gzeira that you're not allowed to blow a shofar in Rosh Hashanah, it said they were mevatel mitzvahs asay deraisa, or that you shouldn't take a lulav, an esrog on the first day of Sukkot, even though it's midoraisa. Why? Because somebody might come to carry the lulav and esrog to the Chacham to ask him if the lulav and esrog is kosher. So when the Bahag said, or when the Bahag wrote, that a Rishus HaRabim Deraisa says only if you have 600,000 people, said the Ramban, and it doesn't make any sense. How many cities in the world have 600,000 people altogether?
in one spot.
In one spot. It's almost unheard of.
But is from the Midbar.
So that was the Chiddush of the Bahag. That just as in the Midbar you had now you didn't have 600,000 people walking in one shot. It was a road that was open to 600,000 people. So he says the Chacham would make a Gzeira. The Chacham don't make Gzeiras for Milsa D'La Shchicha. If something is very infrequent or unlikely to happen, the Chacham wouldn't make a Gzeira. So how is it possible that they would ask her blowing a shofar, or they would blast her carrying a lulav and an esrig for a Milsa D'La Shchicha? So obviously the Ramban says it's not true. There's no such thing.
Tesvav Amos.
So Tesvav Amos, so that is in the Gemara. It's 16 Amos. That's in the Gemara. It's learned from the Agalos.
And a gate on both ends.
Well, if there's a gate on both ends, then it's not a Rishus HaRabim anymore. Okay, it has to be mefulish. It means it has to be open on both ends. So which means to say that the Ramban disagreed with the Ramban, the whole Spanish school of Rishaydim, completely denied this Messiah that you need to have 600,000 people in order for it to be a Rishus HaRabim. So according to them, you can't make an Eruv in any city.
Which is why they don't wear shtarmel.
Why they don't wear shtarmel? Yeah, no, but I'm just saying that I came to Paiskim, I spoke to Rav Yosef Eliyahu. I told him, I don't think they should be wearing hats in Lakewood. He says, you're right. But when I went to other Paiskim, they said, I can tell the Lakewood of Reichem not to wear hats on Shabbos. It's
They look like all the other people.
Exactly. So basically, that's the same.
Except they wouldn't have.
Depends how wide the brim is.
Except they wouldn't be.
Well, if the brim is, well, if it's one tefach, then you have another issue of oil. So the Mishnah Berurah already is, even though that is also not so pashut, but he says the minhag is to be mekel that if the hat is not meant to protect you from the sun, so then you'd have an issue. Okay, even that's not such a pashut the head.
That's one of the things you don't hear regularly. After these early, I have an interview at 2:00.
Because they don't have job interviews. Okay. So you see, number 26 in the reference sheet, they had this chumrah in this location that they wouldn't wear very wide sandals because it might fall off and they might come to carry it on jobs. Now this minhag didn't have any strong basis. There was no real source for it. It was a chumrah yisaira. It was an excessive stringency. Yehuda and Hillel, again, they were always making trouble wherever they went. They did this, and then the entire community was in an uproar. So they took it off. And they didn't want to tell them that it's mutter, because if you tell them that this minhag doesn't have a good basis, then they're going to start being makel with other minhagim. Number 27, another example. Okay, in Akko, they wouldn't sit on benches that belong to non-Jews. Why? Because it looks like you're about to engage in business. You're about to engage in commerce. Because that's what they used to do. They used to sit on those benches. Right? This was not Yehuda and Hillel, this was Reb Shimon Gamliel. He sat on the bench in Akko, and again the community was in an uproar. So he sat on the floor. He didn't want to tell them that it's mutter. Okay, so now we have a machlokes. If you look at number 828 in the reference sheet, Tosis and Nun Aleph, let's read that. Rabbeinu Nissim b'Megillas Sasarim. You know what Megillas Sasarim is? They used to have hidden. They used to write their Chidush HaTorah, but they used to hide it. Okay, they didn't.
Before you were allowed to write it.
Yeah, well, the truth is they already started writing Chidushim in the times of the. Rabbi already wrote the Mishnayos, and before then they had hidden. They wrote notes for themselves. But apparently Rabbeinu Nissim also did the same thing. He wrote Megillas Sasarim. The Haidvar Mutar V'Chem Nogu B'Hem Isra Hainu Sheyodim Shemutar V'Hem Rotzim La'achmar Atzman. V'chein Mashma Lishne Dvarim HaMutarim Avol Dvarim Shenoi Gemach Masto Shesarim Shu Asaf V'Mutar Yachalatu B'Shneim. This is a big chidush. He wanted to say that when it's asr to tell them that it's mutar? That's if they know. It's not because of a mistake. They're not under the mistaken impression that it's really mutter.
It's just a chumrah.
They know it's a chumrah, so therefore don't tell them to be mekel. But if the whole thing began because of a complete mistake, then even for amaratzim you tell them to be mekel, which is a difficult opinion to digest. Because what's the whole reason why you don't want to tell the amaratzim that it's mutter? And they say, if this is mutter, then this is also mutter. So the Maisa, the Sfara shouldn't distinguish.
There must be a degree.
Yeah.
Which it really is a minik shtus, and below that.
Right, but he says that if the whole thing began because of a toast, then you can be matra even for amaratzim. That's the Shita Rabbi Nusim is a bichirush. Sorry.
I guess we're gonna have kidney oat.
Well, kidney oat. Well, the truth is back then, if they did have fields of let's say wheat planted right next to a field of rice. So I guess there is a justification. A lot of the wheat fell into the rice. In fact, even in Morocco, the minhag was that before Pesach they would have to sift through the rice 3 times because it actually was quite common to have wheat kernels in the rice. And they still do that. So it's not a complete minhag toes. There was a good reason to be machmer when it came to rice.
The this story that I told about eating a sandwich in the forest.
That's mamash a minhag toes. So that's that being mekel and something they should really be machmer about. Okay, so then for sure you have to be matir. So kol shekain, yeah. So that was a toes. So the whole thing began because of a mistake. So of course you need to get rid of that minhag.
So if you have Sfardi and Ashkenaz getting married today, regardless of which direction, they both decide to give up the kidneys business.
So the truth is, the minhag always follow the minhag of the husband. That's the way it works. You follow the minhag of the husband. So according to Rav Yitzchak Al-Khan Inspector wouldn't allow Ashkenazim to get rid of kidneys. What?
That enough to follow the minhag of the husband?
No, it's not really a minhag that you follow. It's because of shalom bayis. It's for peace in the house. It's so that there should be peace between the husband and wife.
But I should follow my
If the husband wants to give up the kidneys, shalom bayis.
He wants to give up kidneys. So according to Yitzchak Khan held that it's a problem to give up kidneys because He held that it has the same din as a chayim that we saw previously from the Ramban and from the Rivash that was quoted in Reish Yudal by the Beis Yosef. That there's a what? Oh, so saying if it's a chumrah that was observed from generation to generation, you don't have the option of a taras nadarim of getting rid of it. That's why Yitzchak Kochanim didn't want to allow Ashkenazim to get rid of their minhag of not eating kidneys. But Rabbi Vadi Yosef held that no, there's no minhag of kidneys in Eretz Yisrael. The minhag in Eretz Yisrael is very nice for Poland and for Ukraine and for Germany. That's when they made them, but they didn't. The minhag had no effect on Eretz Yisrael. According to Rabbi Vadi Yosef, you don't need a taras nadarim. According to Rabbi Vadi Yosef, Ashkenazim are allowed to eat kidneys. Right? According to the Ashkenazi poskim, the Ashkenazim are not allowed to get rid of kidneys. Okay? I mean, what? The truth is that a lot of Rabbanim, there were some poskim that didn't like kidneys. The Ivitz said if he could, he would get rid of it because it's memayit. It reduces the amount of simchas yom tov that a person could have. The truth is, if you go to the Pesach hotels, there's so much food that they manage to come up with even without kidneys.
So if a Sephardi woman marries an Ashkenazi husband, can she feed her kids kidneys?
No, because the kids follow the minhag of the husband. Rav Moshe Feinstein was actually quite strict about this. For example, Nusach, he held that a woman should be davening. It's also for the sake for marital harmony, right? That the woman should do what her husband's doing. Husbands, right, want their wives to do like their minhag.
Maybe no, like what they said before. Marital harmony is that the husband goes.
Yeah, so the husband could be moichel.
Like the first night of the first Leila Seder, when the day when they had a Korban Pesach, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the first, after the marriage, they would go to the mother's parents' house to have the Korban Pesach.
Right, so there's a Rash in Eden says that the first Pesach they would go, I don't remember, there's a Rash in Sachim. Rashi Sachim says the very first Yom Tov they used to go, I think, to his parents. Yeah, but they say first to go to his parents. I think that's what I don't remember. I think that Rashi Sachim says they used to first go to his parents. Yeah, I know that it used to be that there's already the Das Kainim when Sheila was born. It says V'haya b'chziv b'lidat ha'isam. Yehuda was in chziv. Because the Torah says that she gave the name, and it was his turn to give the name. So if you look at the Psukim, it says the minhag was that first he would give the name for the child, then she would, and then he would. So that's why it says that Yehuda was in Chziv when the child was born, to explain why why the mother gave the name and why Yehuda didn't give the name. Today it's the opposite. Today the first child, I think the woman, the mother gets to choose the name of the baby. I'm not sure why they changed that. It used to be the father had the first. Right. Okay, so the Balamar also agrees with the Rabbeinu Nissim. Let's read the Balamar, number 29. The Rav calls it b'dvar m'shiyadeh shehu muter v'naig b'hem isr v'imu davar sheminig b'tos matir na'isa b'fnei b'chal ina v'ein lachash la'isa minig. That's also the Shita of the Balamar. So you have the Shita of Rabbeinu Nissim and the Balamar that even for Amaratzim, even for ignoramuses, if the whole thing began because of a toad, the whole thing began because of a mistaken understanding, then you get rid of it completely. The Ravid says, no, you're wrong. The Ravid and the Ramban disagree. You see, the Ravid and the Ramban had an extra grain with the Balamar because they were very upset that the Balamar wrote his Perush on the Rif. The Balamar didn't like a lot of the Psakim of the Rif, so he wrote objections to the Psakim of the Rif, and the Ravid and the Ramban wrote a defense on behalf of the Rif. They didn't like what the Balamar did. So the Ravid says, Masha Kosef Utos, what the Ravid, what the Balamar wrote is a mistake. She'ein Rasha Lahata B'fnei B'nei Medina Shum Davar. It does, if they're Amaratzim, if the communities are made up of ignoramuses, you cannot be mattered for them, even if their minik began because of a toes. The Bnei Chuzai Umemilsa Davashi Duk V'tishkach. You see then Chuzai, the people of Chuzai, they were Amaratzim, and they wouldn't be matter the minik of taking Chala from Iris. Okay, we'll get to that soon. Same thing the Ramban says in Muhammad. Why do you call this here from Muhammad? Because it was a war that he waged against the Balamar. He was upset with the Balamar for writing these objections against the Rif. What were the three cases we saw previously? In Kabul, they wouldn't allow two brothers to bathe together in the bathhouse. We saw the chumrah about the shoes, right? They weren't able to wear white sandals. In Biri, in Psachim, they said that they wouldn't sit on benches in Akko. And these were Amaratzim. These are also examples of minhagim that began because of a complete mistake, and yet they wouldn't be matur.
Sooner or later, somebody from a different town is going to walk into that town and say, "You people crazy."
Well, that's the thing. The halacha was, don't tell them they're crazy. Let them keep their stringencies, because if you let them be makel, then they're going to start being makel with other things.
He's not going to know that the halacha says you can't tell them that they're crazy.
So that's basically what happened to the two brothers. They came in there, but they didn't want to tell them that they're crazy. They didn't want to tell them you guys are totally off, are totally mistaken, because they were worried that they would be matter with other things. Okay. So let's look at the Ran, number 33 in the reference sheet. You have this situation where the ancestors, they began the minhag, and they appreciated that it's only a chorma, that it's an extra stringency, an extra safeguard. But the children, the descendants, start to think that is the ikar halacha. Like a lot of the things in Basar v'chalav. A lot of things in Basar v'chalav is just a minhag. For example, when you have cold, right? If I were to take cereal and milk and use a fleishik spoon, my wife would be hysterical. Okay, there's no chumrah whatsoever. If it's cold, you're allowed to. That example.
With the signs all over the kitchen. This is the fleishik. The son says to his father, "I guess Mom took it really bad about the spoon."
Spoon. Exactly. Exactly. Okay. So you have a community, they think that Gebraks is Chametz Gomer. Okay? Gebraks to them is Chametz Gomer. Now, even though their ancestors appreciated the Gebraks is not Chametz, their ancestors took on Gebraks as an extra safeguard, but they think that it's Chametz. You shouldn't tell them that it's really mutter. Okay?
And it could be that at some point, way back, the ovens weren't able to bake the matzah as quickly as
they'd be able to do.
Most matzah bakeries, the ovens run at 900 to 1,000 degrees. As soon as the matzah hits the oven, it's
still done by wood.
What?
They still do those.
No, but apparently they have ways of firing up these ovens to heat, so that if you ever been to a matzah bakery, they're making shmur matzah, the matzah dough goes in. Literally, when it hits the surface, it's so hot, it's done.
Right.
It's done. No
but
more
that's not the matzah they used to eat.
But they used to, first of all, they used to make thicker matzah.
Right.
And secondly, they didn't necessarily cook it as fast enough so that there wasn't a shash, that there could be some comments.
Right.
So in those days, the Brooks had some
basis, but today there's no the basis. Yeah. So basically, that seems to be halacha, stringent like the Ramban Ran. So this is really the halacha, that we need to be stringent in accordance with the Ravid, the Ramban, and the Ran, that if you have that you shouldn't be matir minhagim, even though the thing began as a mistake, or it began as a safeguard and now people think that it's mutter, don't be matir these minhagim for them, because then it's going to lead them to be matir other things, unless it's a minhag that leads to an aveira. It's a minhag that leads to a leniency. If it's a minhag that's already leading to a leniency, so then it's a good idea to get rid of. Some of the things that I just had somebody complained to me, he says when he learned about kashrus, when he became Jewish, when he went through his conversion, they taught him that the point of kashrus, the Medrash says, is to unite Jewish people, right? That instead of going to eat with the non-Jews, right, because they don't eat kosher, so you go to eat with a fellow Jew because you both keep kosher. So kashrus is supposed to be something that unites Jews together, and unfortunately, it's become a cause for division. Okay, I don't eat your hechsher, you don't eat my hechsher, I don't trust you, and it shouldn't be that way. Right? The halacha is very unequivocal that you can go eat by anybody's house. If the Baal Bayis is eating from the food, then you can eat. You don't have to start asking questions about that person's hechsher, and that's what I do. When I go somewhere, I eat. They don't ask questions. You're allowed to go everywhere. That's my kind. If you want to be like Rav Mordechai Eliyahu, who didn't eat anybody's food, he only ate food that was shechted the meat that was shechted from an animal that was shechted by his private shechet, and he personally checked the lungs. And when he went overseas, right, he would eat boiled eggs and boiled potatoes, and he would cook it in his own pot that he took along in his suitcase. So he didn't trust anybody. Right? He didn't trust any kashrus. He only trusted his own wife and the things that he checked himself. Okay, that's already another chumrah. That's kaddish ya'amr lay. But right, you're allowed to trust any hechsher.
So that's what you do for yourself. Now, what would you do, let's say, for your shul?
With shul, I would make the best hechsher so everybody could eat. That I have no problem. But I personally would eat any.
So
any shul.
Anybody in the shul cook whatever they want and bring it to shul and serve it for a kiddush?
Oh, would I allow others? Yeah. I would allow if it's made in a from home, or if it was bought from products that were under the hashgacha.
It's a different story. It's very tough to buy something non-kosher.
Yeah, if anything that was cooked at home. If I was a rav of a shul, I would allow anything that was homemade. I would allow into the shul because everybody has a cheskas kashrus.
Most places don't, and not for the reason that they don't trust necessarily their own membership, but you have a problem when somebody, let's say, comes into the community and rents the shul, let's say. Right. And they want to bring in their own stuff. So that becomes a problem.
That's interesting.
And the problem becomes one that you're embarrassing somebody.
But the truth, but the halacha is very unequivocal that anything that is made in a Jewish home by any observant Jew, every Jew has a cheskas kashrus.
I'm saying in terms of shuls and catering halls, it's done because it's a light plug.
A light plug. They don't want to have different standards. Okay. A lot of people are wary about eating food that was made in other people's kitchens because they're worried maybe that person doesn't observe kosher well enough. So therefore in the shuls, just to avoid the headache, they let everybody bring in what they want. Okay, but that's not Mikra Halacha.
We had that question come up recently, and we just put out a little sign that this is homemade, whatever you want.
Yeah. No, but I'm just saying kashrus is not supposed to be creating division. Kashrus is supposed to be uniting people, right? So it's a bit unfortunate that kashrus has become a cause.
Kashrus became a private business. We don't have one community hashgacha.
Right.
Everybody, says we're going to follow this one.
Right. Now the truth is, eateries are more problem. Eateries are already more tricky.
Mechitzas, they have the same problem. In some ways, the mechitzas, I don't have their mechitzas not that tall. I don't do this. The mechitza, you can see this. The mechitza, you do this.
Moshe Feinstein said you're allowed to see through the mechitza. Yeah, mechitza is also become a very runner. So, yeah. So, Achamar Shnagu b'nei me'atzma. Oh, because of Isser Svichin, Heter Mechira.
That was a big problem.
Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, when we gave the shiur on Heter Mechira, he says first of all, Yevul Nachri is also a very difficult Heter. And Heter Mechira is also a very difficult Heter, but he says the whole Isser is Drabanan. So if it's Doraisa, nobody has the prerogative to be Mekel on an Isser Doraisa, because the Torah sets its own standards. And the Chamim...
It's going to kick into an Isser Doraisa.
Right. But today's Shemitah is not an... Oh, you mean when Roiv Am Yisrael gets to Eretz Yisrael, then Shemitah will become...
Borderline right now. We
still have a little bit of way to go. But today Shemitah is Drabanan. So Shlomo Zalman Auerbach said that when it comes to the Rabbanon, they set the protocols. And they said that if there's a school of Paiskim that are matter, when it comes to Rabbanon, you're allowed to be Mekel. The Gemara says that if you see the Rav making a mistake, if it's regarding a Doraisa, you have to object. If it's Rabbanon, you can allow him to give the heter. You can allow everybody to act on the heter. And then later you can ask him about it because it's the Rabbanon. Right? And the Rabbanon, hey mamru ve'hei mamru, that's the Yisod when it comes to Rabbanon. They set the rules. And they said that when you have a safek, a machlokes paiskim, safek Rabbanon l'kula. So if Shlomo Zalman said he doesn't understand why there's such a big uproar about the heter mechira. It's true, it is a very difficult heter, but since the whole thing is the Rabbanon, and there's a reasonable school of paiskim or mat to the heter mechira, he says there isn't an issue.
And Yudah, when he was pasking, that oath was pardoned.
Who? Oh, Rav Yosef Glili.
Now, what did he change? Did he change the rice or Bechlav is chicken and midiraisa?
No, we maintain that chicken is on Rabbanon, but he didn't enact an Igzera. The microphone was off the whole time.
Yeah. But it was
but I don't think that means that on Zoom they didn't hear a word. They probably left. Okay. Yeah, poor Menachem Zusbaum. He has to start coming here. Somebody has to pay for a taxi and he has to come in. Okay, yeah, sorry. So basically, a chicken is Drabanan. Rabbi Yosef it wasn't Geyser.
From the beginning was always a Mitzvah.
Yeah, there's three Tanan, 3 Shitas in the Mishnah Chulin, but we ruled that it's an Isser Drabanan. Rabbi Yosef was Matur the Gamri. Okay? So, let's carry on. Okay, so this is the Mishnah Psachim, Daf Nun, and that's what you mentioned, Yisachar number 35 in the reference sheet. This relates to having to observe the local minhag. You come from a location where they didn't have the minhag to be machmir, you come to a location where they're machmir. So for example, if somebody is a Sephardi, and he made a liyah from Baghdad and he moved to Poland, is he allowed to eat kitnius? So Mar says, no. If you're a Baghdadi that goes to Warsaw, no kitnius for you because you've just moved to a community that doesn't eat kitnius. This is notwithstanding Rabbi Avad Yosef that says in Eretz Yisrael you can eat kitnius, but this is in Warsaw. Or if you have somebody from Warsaw that goes to Baghdad, he still has to continue observing his family tradition of not eating kitnius, so therefore you're machmer on both ends. Okay, so number 36 in the reference sheet. So it says, you know what kind of minig you have to observe? A chashav minig that was nahag al pi tamid chachamim. But if you come from a family that has a minig that was made because of a mistake, or because of or just because the Amaratzim took on that minig, then you don't have to keep that minig when you move to a different location, or even when you move to a different location, you don't need to observe that minig if it wasn't a minig that was enacted by Tamid Chachamim. Okay? So...
You're only allowed to be makil if you move to an area that's makil.
No,
you have to observe the chumrah of the location that you came to if it's a chumrah that was enacted by Tamid Chachamim.
If you come to a location that's makil,
but you came from a location that was machmir. You got to stick with the chumrah.
So the Mishnah's mashma noisen of chumrah makom shiatzim yisham, chumrah makom shalach nisham. You have to take on the stringency whether observing the origin is stringent or whether observing the destination is stringent. In both ends, you have to be machmir. Okay.
Regarding, in other words, if you go to
like if I come from the States,
if I hear Israeli, they go to school start.
Right.
There's, it's not the same story because it's perfect.
Very good. Very good. So the thing is, this is the perfect example. Why do we observe Yom Tov Sheni? This is mamash l'alacha. If an Israeli goes to Chutz La'aretz, why is he observing Yom Tov Sheni? Because he has to conform with the local custom. Why does a chutznik that comes to Eretz Yisrael, why does he have to observe? Why does he have to observe Yom Tov Sheni? Because in his place of origin, you observe.
Rabbis here, well-known rabbis, are there not here. For
Yom Tov
people
Sheni.
even up to they said if you're planning to learn for a year in Eretz Yisrael, you can keep one day.
Or according to the Chacham Tzvi and the Shulchan Aruch Harav, Yom Tov Sheni was not enacted as a minhag of your family or where you live. It was enacted as a minhag according to locale. So we maintain, like the Shulchan Aruch, that it's a minhag based on your community, not location. Therefore, according to the Chacham Tzvi and the Shulchan Aruch Harav, an Israeli in Chutz La'aretz keeps 2 days. A Chutznik in Eretz Yisrael keeps 1 day.
What when it hits up against the rice like the film?
So the thing is, an Israeli goes to Chutz La'aretz, before Hesse he's not allowed to do malacha, but in privacy he puts on tefillin. Why? Because there isn't really even any isser to put on tefillin on Yom Tov. Mikra Dedina, there's no prohibition against putting on tefillin on Yom Tov. Okay? So if you look at Taisus Pirsh Maslisim Shadaiti Lachsam Tukma, this relates to Yom Tov Sheni. It's when the person still plans on going back. So if a Chutz La'aretz comes to visit Eretz Yisrael, he's still planning to go back to Chutz La'aretz, so he still retains the status as a Chutznik, and that's why he needs to keep 2 days. But if you already come to move to Eretz Yisrael, so then you get a new status, and therefore you adopt the local minhag. Okay?
You can always say that the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael may be during that year, this side of the Chazak. In other words, if he's here. And that's the psak, I guess, of the rabbis that they're making.
You know, I'm not sure that's the idea. It reminds me, we'll finish with this. There's a certain Rabbi Atun in Har Nov. He's a very passionate Zionist. So he said that somebody once asked him the following question when he went to visit France. The Orach Chaim HaKadosh says that when you come to Eretz Yisrael, you get a brand new neshama. So he asked Rabbi Atun, is that only the first time you come to Eretz Yisrael? Or what happens if every time you go back and you come back to get a new neshama? So he says, I don't know the answer, but when the Orach Chaim wrote whatever he wrote, it didn't occur to him that somebody would come to Eretz Yisrael and still want to go back.
It's like they said that the first time you look at the Kohanim, you get one in one eye. The second time, you get one in the other eye. The third time you look at them, you get one in your eye.
Very good. I will stop over here. Okay,
That's why they have that house over there. You can't look anymore.